Thank you for dedicating a day to this forum organized by the Canalway. I want to thank Hannah Blake and Beth Shumeka for both at the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor for inviting me. My name is Daniel McKay. I'm Director of Public Policy at the Preservation League of New York State. I oversee the League's statewide and congressional legislative advocacy efforts, and if the name sounds familiar, my wife Jean McKay is Communications Director at the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor, but she sits at an entirely different part of the office than Beth and Hannah, and had no idea I was here until I got in the car with her this morning. Hannah has put this panel at the right spot in the agenda, because I think what you're going to hear from our four very distinguished panelists is a lot of the conversation about concept and ideas and sort of the theory theories we were hearing about earlier in the day all comes into practice. And we really do want to meet the practitioners. We want to meet the folks who are putting all these pieces together, who are taking the risks, who are executing the vision, and I think we have that in the panel assembled here. I want to note, diverge for just one moment. There's been some talk already in earlier presentations about the federal and state rehabilitation tax credit programs. Those are simply one tool of many that I think the panel will talk about. There are certain panelists who don't even use those tools. But just to give you some perspective on at least one key incentive that the League serves as an advocate for, the federal and state rehabilitation tax credit programs work together to provide an incentive, a public incentive for private reinvestment in historic structures. And what's most interesting is what has happened in New York State over the past decade with the federal and state programs. Prior to 2007, 95% of the use of the federal rehabilitation tax credit program in New York State was south of Albany, primarily in New York City and the metro area. So upstate New York was seeing very little use of the federal rehabilitation tax credit program. Since the state credit program has come online as a complementary component to the federal credit, about 75% of the application activity into the federal program has come from upstate New York projects. So the state credit, working together with the federal credit, is proving a very different sort of tool than the federal credit alone. Last year in 2012, the federal credit generated nearly $1 billion in rehabilitation activity in New York State, and already this year the State Preservation Office is looking at probably reaching the $1.5 billion benchmark in 2013. We want to see that type of investment for that purpose come to upstate communities. There's no reason in the world now for New York City to be the primary beneficiary of that type of investment, that type of economic development, that type of community renewal. So that's only one tool in the toolbox. We'll hear some more about it, but we'll hopefully hear a great deal about other tools as well. I'm going to introduce each panelist individually, but before we get started with that, I want to introduce you all to the panel, in the sense that I want the panel to know who at least in aggregate is here today. Over 100 attendees. When I ran through the attendance list, about 26 folks from local, regional, and regional economic development entities. 16 folks here have either serve as elected officials or appointees to various local commissions or planning boards. 17 with some type of business or consulting relationship on issues of concern to us. 5 folks here from the planning sector. 12 folks from the advocacy sector, and 22 from county and state agencies. So a very interesting mix in the audience, and so please keep that mix in mind as you make your presentations. To start, we've asked Rick Hauser. Rick launched Insight Architecture in the village of Perry, New York in 2001, and soon co-founded a sister business to buy and rehab downtown buildings. He's taught architecture for 12 years at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva in the Finger Lakes region, and has also helped launch and manages several regional events, including a farmers market, an annual First Night celebration, and a chalk art festival, all part of the mix of what needs to happen in a downtown locale. He began Perry Main Street Association, a volunteer-led downtown advocacy and action organization, in 2006. And 6 years ago, he developed an anti-blight tool called Main Street LLC, a community-wide development corporation that he will describe further in his presentation. The concept has been tested and proven via Perry New York LLC, which has completed several broadly owned downtown projects that are the focus of his presentation. And not unique to Rick, because we have several elected officials amongst the developers here. In March, Rick was elected mayor of Perry, and welcome to the political world, sir.
Thanks. I think at the level of a village the size of Perry, I don't know if there's politicians. I think there's more pragmaticians. At least that's what I'm hoping. And you know, the introduction is maybe relevant in that, again, in small towns and villages, you wear many hats. I think there's a lot of multi-hat wearers here, and so it's always overly simplistic to define yourself by one thing, whether you're on the outside or whether you're on the inside, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're a business owner. They're all intermixed, and so I kind of seek to pursue it that way. I think instead of conflicts of interest, I think of them as confluences of interest. And I think that's relevant here because the title of the talk is Main Street LLC. And Main Street LLC is meant to be illustrative of an attitude. And that attitude starts with the two pieces of the title. On the one side, you have Main Street. And we know what that means. We've talked about it a lot. But symbolically, Main Street, it's the civic realm. It's the place, the public barometer of a community's health. It's the all ships rise together part of the community. It's the qualitative component. And then over here, you've got this dry three-letter acronym, LLC, Limited Liability Corporation. This is a for-profit, private sector entity that at its simplest level would buy and fix up buildings. And so, you know, the interesting thing coming at this point in the conversation today is this blurring of distinction between lines, following up on LOCA vesting, following up on some of the other discussions, community banks, and the other efforts. This idea of the partnering of these two concepts. So when you bump these two things up against each other, what do you get? Well, an LLC at its simplest would be, let's say, two people. Let's say Daniel and myself, we decide to buy a building in our downtown, and we reach into our pockets and we come up with some cash and we put in what we can and we borrow the rest, and we're signing for it personally. We take on our project and hopefully we do a pretty good job, and if we fill it and make a profit, then we split it, and if it cash flows, then we sit on it, and if it loses money, we're liable for it. And we're also the ones that care most deeply about this building because we're the ones who's on the line as to whether it succeeds. A Main Street LLC is exactly the same legally, but with one notable difference. Instead of just the two of us owning the building, imagine if all of us owned a piece of the building. And that's exactly what we've done. So instead of 2 investors, you'd have 10 or 20 or 50 investors. Scale it to the size of your community. Let's say you can invest anything from $2,500 to $25,000. You can invest your cash. You can invest from your self-directed IRA. Or if you're an architect, or if you're a lawyer, or if you're a surveyor, you can put in your professional services or a portion of them as an in-kind investment towards the project. Let's say you're a plumber. You can put in your services or a portion of them as an in-kind investment. If you're a local lumberyard, a portion of your contribution can be in the form of in-kind materials. As a result of just that simple change in the structure, everything changes. And some of these things I anticipated at the beginning, but so many of them I learned along the way, and that's part of what in this kind of highly condensed version of trying to share with you the Main Street LLC concept, I want to make sure I get across today. First of all, of course, you now all have skin in the game. It's your building. You own a piece of it. So that's a big difference, because now you have buy-in in the way that only money can create that sense of ownership. And you're going to make sure you direct tenants to that building. You're going to make sure that you frequent those tenants and support those tenants, and that you direct others to do the same. You're going to become an advocate. You'll be involved in the local promotional entities to encourage the success of the downtown. You have a stake in it. And so that stakeholder aspect of a Main Street LLC is, of course, one of the natural outcomes of it. And there's a lot of other ways in which it works very well towards identifying and overcoming one of the problems that I've noticed is in common in many of our small villages and small cities across upstate. This is a concept that I've now been working with a number of other communities on, and so communities from the North Country in Messina, New York, west to Attica, New York, have recently just formed Main Street LLCs. They're all doing it their own way a little bit, but with the basic premise of a broad-based buy-in, taking on a major anchor project that's too big for one person to take on. And I'll get into that a little bit more. The subtitle, Community Entrepreneurism and the Case for Private Sector Rehab, that's the part I'm going to shrink as a result of the time constraints. But it's vital to at least explain that community entrepreneurism is the more essential concept here, because it's the attitude that matters. It's the state of mind. It's the problem-solving approach that you take to your community, that you take back with you from today, rather than any specific formula or recipe, because each community is unique, and each problem you face, even if it's not directly the issue of redevelopment of buildings on Main Street, those problems can benefit from a community entrepreneurism-based approach. This is the briefest of overviews of Perry, New York, because I know you've all been there and are very familiar with its Main Street. But it is your fairly typical Finger Lake / Western New York. It's got a little bit of an identity crisis. It's kind of on the edge of both a Main Street, 4-block Main Street, and for your orientation pleasure, the buildings that I've been directly involved in that I might be touching on in the next few minutes. This one, the first project we undertook here, the Bussey building, my office is up on the 2nd floor of that, bookstore on the 1st floor, other businesses over here. We've got the Rufus Smith building, that's a 12,000 square foot building that was largely vacant, is now 100% full on 3 levels. And then more recently you have this project, the Howell building, which has gorgeous apartments upstairs and a butcher and an outdoor store on the 1st floor. That one, as well as the Wise building, which has kind of a similar mixed use on the side street, were more recent, and they took advantage of the rehabilitation tax credits. These are projects of the scale of your community. They're small scale projects. 8,000 square foot buildings, they would not have been able to, it would not have been reasonable to pursue the rehabilitation tax credits prior to the enhanced New York State component that makes the math work, that makes it the effort and the hoops and the time involved in getting through that process worth it. But once you bring in the New York State component, these projects can happen. And many other tools were used, but just kind of tying into what Daniel was saying, I think these were good examples of that. And then finally, public civic space enhancement. A former parking lot turned into a festival plaza. We relocated our successful dynamic farmers market and chalk art festival there. Other events now can be spawned from that location. It's right in the heart of the downtown. It serves the businesses in that it puts feet on the street that helps to support the businesses that we've just finished recruiting. So you can't just focus on one thing, of course, and that's an important part of this conversation. We're here to talk about buildings and developing them, but developing a building that's not the story. That's, of course, you're enabling a much broader array of things to then unfold from there. So those are things I just wanted to touch on. And then as far as the community entrepreneurism ingredients, I'm only going to mention in any length the first one, because it's the most important one, and because at this point in the day, it allows you to actually do something with your hands. So it's about state of mind, and I really feel that community entrepreneurism is about state of mind. It's about thinking differently and seeing differently. And ultimately, recognizing that the opportunity is in the problem. So here's the audience participation part of the show. If you want to just take your hands and just go like this, just fold them together. All right. Now, I want to know how many right thumbers you have. How many people have their right thumb at the top? Raise your arms. Right thumbers. Left thumbers? Oh, I'm sorry. Left thumbers are wrong. Wrong. It's clearly, right thumber is the correct way of doing it. Ask any right thumber in the room, and they will tell you it feels very comfortable and normal. Now, I want you to take your hands and switch it. Yeah, I know, just try. How does that feel? It's really weird, but I mean, it can't really be wrong because half of you were doing it and felt it was right. So it's only useful in the sense that I find myself constantly, as an architect, I'm always thinking about problems. I'm always trying to, I know there's a solution. Any design problem has an answer. And if I'm banging my head against the wall, I'll find that my arms are like this, my hands are folded, and if I can't figure things out, I just switch. And that disconnect, that disruptive technology, that's my favorite word of the day, that kind of shakes me loose and kind of opens up my mind to different avenues of thinking. And that's the way we need to approach downtown revitalization, and each component of this is we need to change how we think. State of mind, community entrepreneurism. I talk about chance taking as another ingredient because community entrepreneurism is about risk, development is about risk, enough said. Sweat. Of course, taking risk leads to this ingredient, sweat, because community entrepreneurism is hard work. It's a lot of planning. My intro mentioned some events I was involved in. This, for me, started as a volunteer engagement component in the community, different events I've been involved in, and the kind of planning and the kind of drilling deep and leaving no stone unturned, that hard work is, of course, what then leads to the next ingredient, which is confidence, right? Because community entrepreneurism is informed optimism. And I have to briefly just touch on the isms. Because if you're going to approach a project, if you're going to take on one of these buildings, you're going to encounter the isms. And the first one is optimism, the informed kind, not blind. You know your stuff, and that allows you to cope with the other isms. Those isms are things like criticism. I like criticism. Criticism is the greatest thing, of course. You learn from criticism. Can't really succeed without it. But then you have skepticism. I think skepticism are really people who want to support you, but they don't have the data. They need the data, and they will only be transformed by doing. So no amount of talking, cajoling, convincing, envisioning, imagining, no reports on shelves, none of that makes a difference. And so skepticism's okay, and skeptics have become the greatest supporters in all endeavors that I've been involved in. Those who wanted to believe but didn't have the data, once they saw things come to pass, became on the front lines from that point forward. So I've come to embrace skepticisms and skeptics as an integral part of this process. And then we have cynicism, the last ism. Cynics are vested in your failure. And so my advice is smile and walk away. Okay, so those are the isms. Synergy, mentioned at the beginning, and I think throughout the day, this idea that you do many things. This is about many components, and I'm not going to talk more about that. Coalitions, to me, is distinct from simply getting a group of people together. A coalition is about getting people with different perspectives, people that you wouldn't normally feel really comfortable working with on something, people who actually have the opposing point of view, and bringing them into the conversation, finding that common goal, and working together. I would give you more examples of this wonderful trail around Silver Lake that everyone was against until the people who were against it were put in charge of it. And then they became the biggest advocates and saw it through, but that would be a longer story. And then we have scale, because community entrepreneurism does require thinking big. It requires doing things at a critical mass so that they have enough complexity, richness, and components to succeed. I think of Daniel Burnham, who planned the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1892, said, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and will in themselves probably never be realized. Instead, make big plans, aim high, but then, of course, execute." And that's what requires the other components. And these are the things that lead to community entrepreneurism. I need to point out a distinction between community involvement and community entrepreneurism. And I'm already preaching to the choir whenever I am speaking to a group when it comes to getting involved. It's the prerogative and it's the obligation of small town living. Involvement. It means two things. If you want something done, no one's going to do it for you. You've got to just get up and do it yourself. But the corollary to that is, if you want something done, you can do it. You are empowered to do it. The echelons of power, the hierarchies, the lines of communication are not so deep, they're not so difficult to navigate. So it's highly empowering to recognize that. And I've really noticed that there are three traditional models of the interaction of business and community. And these are ones you'll be familiar with. The first is money, here called sponsorship. The community supports the business, and the business gives back. Simple, necessary, but not sufficient. The second one, time. We give of our time, otherwise known as volunteerism. Business leaders especially can give in terms of serving in the community, leading Red Cross drives or serving chicken barbecues or fundraisers, organizing events. Necessary, absolutely, but not sufficient. And then we've got wisdom. You give of your wisdom. Nonprofit type business roles. You sit on nonprofit boards. You use your skills directly to the benefit of important civic advancement. And again, it sounds like that's who's here. Necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. So this fourth model of community entrepreneurism comes along, and this was the original definition, the commitment of business to bringing new ideas, investment, and problem solving to a local community. I pulled this name from a book by John Abrams called The Company We Keep, and he uses his model as a design-build firm on Martha's Vineyard to show how, while he was busy building multi-million-dollar houses and doing quite well, a pervasive problem in Martha's Vineyard is that the people who serve the people in the multi-million-dollar houses can't afford to live on Martha's Vineyard. And so he had unique expertise as a design-build firm to try to alleviate that problem, and he got involved in actually forming an organization and an actual company that helps move that forward. And he recognizes that's good for the community, and he recognizes that that's good for his business, and he doesn't see anything wrong with that. And neither do I. But how do we broaden this definition to address the problems of downtown? So I don't have to retell the story of downtowns, and I know there's many different factors affecting different communities, but I can at least point out some simple truths. That the condition of a downtown is usually not a reflection of the amount of volunteerism or pride or expertise that resides in a community. It's usually not a result of demand that exists for space or a result of the government apathy. And it's often not a result of a lack of citizens who would like to see change. What I've come to observe was that the condition of a downtown is often tied to a disconnect, a chasm, really, between the scale of the buildings and the motives of the current building owners. In the past, we've seen great examples today. Larger buildings were owned by larger downtown entities, department stores, theaters, hotels. They had an ability, they had an understanding, they had a desire to consider the long-term returns on their investment. So as communities seek to reinvent their downtowns, one difficulty is recognizing who now has the long-term interest and the capital to invest appropriately, to salvage, to maintain, and to rehabilitate those structures and see the return on those investments come to pass. So, with that in mind, I had a more targeted definition of community entrepreneurism that's more than John Abrams' idea of a business bringing new ideas, problem solving, and investment to a local community. I would say that it's the commitment of community leaders to invent business models that bridge the gap between short-term financial self-interest and long-range community self-interest. So we're all self-interested, we're just self-interested at a broader level. Community has self-interest too. So let's go ahead, let's invent a model. And let's call it Main Street LLC. You already got a preview of this one. Well, what would such a concept look like? So first of all, it would have to fill a need, right? No individual is going to do it. Simple enough. Whoops. Next, it would ask people to put their money where their house is. That is to say that it's self-interest. It's just self-interest writ large. And then once done, I learned something else. It also encourages people to keep their house where their money is. And if that doesn't immediately make sense, think about it a minute. People who then invest in your LLC, they get more engaged in the community. It connects them back to place. It connects them back to the success of the community. They feel vested. They stick around. After that, some more. It would inspire people to invest in their communities. That is, it's a qualitative and a quantitative argument, but it's got to be linked to a larger vision. What else would this concept have to look like? As I mentioned before, it would create community cheerleaders. Right? Get your pom-poms out. It would be broad-based enough to create a sense of ownership in only the way that money can among many citizens who become downtown's newest advocates. It would create a proactive network of committed residents for the next opportunity. This is something I did not anticipate, but which has become really essential. So such a group, once founded, would be poised to move quickly to rehab an anchor property, let's say a grant, or an auction, or a fire sale, or a death, or a business inquiry presents itself. And you may have an example in your community of a time when a building came up on the market or for auction and nobody was around to buy it who had a plan. The person who bought it bid $5,000 for it. They were the only one at the auction, so they won. But here's the problem. They only had $5,000. Now you've lost that building for another generation. So having a group ready-made, ready-formed, poised, with proactive citizens involved makes all the difference. What else? It creates a compelling narrative. It has to create success on the ground that neutralizes that lingering skepticism about opportunities, because again, action, demonstrated success, trumps theories about supply and demand. You can talk all you want about supply and demand on your downtown. If you've rehabbed a building and you've filled it, if you've created a gorgeous apartment and you've rented it, then it's game over. You've made your case. And that creates the next thing, which is momentum for others. That's the necessary ingredient for self-fulfilling prophecies. So many of the examples we see today are about momentum. They're about catalytic projects that then stimulate others to step up to the plate. And then it would spread the risk. One of the great things about this approach is it spreads the risk. Once that risk has been minimized and the qualitative benefits are enumerated because there's strength in numbers. Each of you, each investor, is only putting in as much money as you can afford to not see again for a long time. That's the sales pitch. It's the anti-sales pitch. Don't expect to see a short-term return. Put it in, say goodbye, wait 15 years while we pay off our mortgage. The pitch is actually much better than that once the rehab tax credit comes along. But we can talk about that later. Anyway, this was the program around which we invented a solution to bridge the gap that was stifling reinvestment downtown. First in Perry, through several projects, and now in other communities that are kind of adapting the model. There are questions that come up. I call them the 4 paradoxes. These are things that don't immediately make sense when one is kind of pondering this model. I have 5 minutes? 2 minutes. So I will not talk about these 4 questions. You will ask me about them if you want, and we can chat about it later. So at that point, we've got the picture show, the various befores and the afters and the interiors. That's actually my office up there. Second floor, the whole story of second floors being, of course, underutilized and being absolutely necessary to making a project work. Almost goes without saying to the people in this room. But it was certainly surprising. In a lot of communities, people don't understand why would you invest in second floor space when there's vacant space right on the first floor. So getting past that and understanding the business model that makes this thing work was a first step. This is the Rufus Smith building before, after, artists on the 3rd floor, professional offices on the 2nd floor, retail and fitness on the 1st floor. And again, the kind of a funky, playful juxtaposition of old and new on the interior. The Wise building before and after. First floor space. The Howell building before. Boy, that was bad. And after. And a before and after of one of the apartments upstairs. The one on the left was, they were evicted right about when we put the purchase offer in because there was water leaking into the light fixtures. Kind of scary. Before, after, interiors. Before, after. Bop, 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 bop. Thank you.
Can you imagine having Mayor Rick in charge of your building department and planning board appointments and zoning board? I mean, that would be a small slice of heaven. And our next presenter, Andrew Meyer, is in a similar position because he is also a mayor of the village of Medina, directly on the corridor. He was born and raised there. He's a partner in an established general practice law firm there, Webster, Schubel and Meyer LLP. Served as a village mayor since 2011 after 3 years as deputy mayor, so he obviously had good performance ratings in that capacity. Cheerleader for preservation of Medina's downtown historic district and embraced historic redevelopment himself through his own restoration of a former hotel and shirt factory in Medina's downtown. And he's been very involved in the a very significant restoration effort in Medina, restoration of the former Bent's Opera House, which is a key building and actually on the Preservation League's 7 to Save list. So let me get queued up here, Mr. Meyer's presentation. Andrew, you want to come up here for this? Thanks. Oh, come on now.
Hard to watch the show here. Is it spell check? Slideshow.
There you go. Sorry. That's all right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a disclaimer. If I seem to get a little groggy halfway through, someone put the cookie plate right in front of my chair, and I have a sweet tooth, so it'll just be a carb crash. I'll get through it. I'll be fine. First off, I just want to thank Hannah Blake for putting on a really fantastic presentation here. It really surpassed my expectations. The presenters right from the morning were fantastic and all the way through. And just want to express what a privilege it is for me to be in the company of those presenters. And thanks to Hannah and her team for inviting me to be here. I am the mayor of the village of Medina. The village is village of about 6,000 people situated on the Erie Canal, midway between Buffalo and Rochester. And we have some pretty wonderful, intact architectural assets in our business district. and the downtown was not ravaged by urban renewal. We did not destroy our buildings. We have almost every building there intact that was there 100 years ago, and with just a few exceptions, unfortunately, due to fires. But we have a great base from which to work to engage in some really important preservation projects. I've been on the board since 2007, and one of our priorities as a village has been to continue the development of our business district. In addition to having great architecture, we also have a really great business population within our business district. And we've been making great strides in the last several years to attract new businesses, new developments to the business district, rehab projects, and most recently designation by the Landmark Society's, Preservation League of New York State's designation of Bent's Opera House in downtown as one of their 7 to Save for 2012. We've also hosted several conferences in Medina. We had a field session during the National Trust, as did our sister village, Albion, down the road, and we also have hosted other conferences. Many of those conferences and other activities and all the other investment that we've seen in our business district has also had babies. We've seen new people come into the community, seeing what's happening, wanting to invest, people without any connection to Medina or only thin connections to the community. A couple from Buffalo just recently purchased and is rehabbing a building downtown. Architect from North Dakota with some connections to the business district bought and did a wonderful rehab on a cornerstone building downtown as well. So it's nice to see not just development projects happening, but to see a little bit of a snowball. And with each passing year, I think that snowball gets bigger. And I am just one of these snowflakes that make up that ball. This is Bent's Opera House that I'll talk about in just a few minutes. My own building is the Robert H. Newell Shirt Factory building. It was historically, originally, built in 1876 as a hotel. Had about 30-some guest rooms, and the hotel business didn't go so hot up until 1918 when it was turned into a shirt factory. I took this picture about 3 weeks ago. It's really hard to source out a Model T that's in any good condition, but no, this is taken probably about 1924. This is after it was converted to a shirt factory. There used to be a big porch that extended off the front, approximately where the sign is right now. Unfortunately, the cast iron railings are also gone. This is one of my favorite shots, historical shots of the building. The Newell Company, which was a shirt factory, manufactured high-end custom shirts for some very interesting persons, industrialists, entertainers, world leaders like Winston Churchill, Bob Hope, presidents, entertainers, John Jacob Astor. And they had a network of salesmen all throughout the country, and they would have regular conferences back in Medina. And this is one of the conferences they had. Mr. Newell is in here. I'm sorry, Mr. Newell is not in this photo, but each face has a unique story behind it. And it's really in honor of those people and their children and their offspring that we undertake preservation efforts. It's not just about the buildings, it's about those people that came before us. And this photo, I think, reminds us of that. The anatomy of my project here, we took advantage of as many incentives as we possibly could. We did have a historic and mixed-use real property tax exemption that was put on the books, and this project was able to take advantage of that. That's under real property tax law. If any of you do not have those in your communities and you'd like to look at them, there's a whole host of provisions under real property tax law pertaining to exemptions for mixed-use property and historic property. I'd encourage you to check those out. Historic rehab tax credits, of course. This project was placed in service in 2010, so it predated some of the most recent modifications to the tax credit, New York State tax credit, which in fact aren't taking effect until 2015, I believe. But had those incentives been in place at the time I undertook this project and placed it in service, it would have been much better financially for the project. I would have been able to undertake a lot more investment. These were earlier credits which did not allow refundability of the New York State portion, so we ended up selling the federal credits and only the federal credits to an out-of-state investor for so many cents on the dollar, and after transaction costs, you know, we probably netted about 50 cents on the dollar for every federal credit the project earned and did not net anything on the state credits. So this is an example where technically a state credit was earned, but nobody's actually going to avail themselves of it. And that was one of the flaws of the old tax credit program, which is now fixed through the refundability of the New York State credit, which is just an enormous, enormous benefit and enhancement to that program. National Trust loan funds also participated through a first mortgage in the property, as did Empire State Development for a second, and there's also New York Main Street funds in the project. National Grid Main Street program, which is little known, but it is out there. It's a great program. How many communities here are served by National Grid as your electric utility? Not too many, about maybe a third of you. If you have a Main Street community, I'm sure you do if you're here, they do have grant programs for Main Street rehabs, and it's worth looking into. And then, of course, Restore New York was not included in this project, but that was just one that was I put down there as well as a potential incentive. Our approach to the rehab was to try to figure out as many mixed uses in the building as we possibly could, to diversify revenue streams, to allow us to test markets and see what works and what didn't. And also just to match the configuration of the different spaces we were rehabbing. You're not going to sell clothes on the third floor of a building without an elevator. So you have to find uses for the upper floors especially that match the configuration, the layout, even the window orientation and the like. So what we did is on the first floor we have some small retail space, restaurant, a service space, and some civic and community use space. Second floor is an office. That's my law office. And we also have some remaining space which is yet to be leased. And the third floor is residential and also hotel now as well. And without further ado, I'm just going to launch into some photos of the completed project. This is first on the cafe side. I apologize for the graininess of the photo. Had I known we were projecting onto a football stadium-sized screen, I would have found a better resolution photo, but I have to make sure to IMAX-proof my next presentation. That's a little better. This is the back of the cafe. This is Shirt Factory Cafe. This is the back of the building. Probably about 1917, 1918, a boiler room was attached to the back of the building, which was a coal-fired boiler, and attached to the back side of that was a single-story coal storage room. When I bought the building, it had not been in use for about probably 40 years. The roof had collapsed. The realtor said, this is going to make a great parking lot, tear down the walls, and you'll have on-site parking. Didn't really want to do that. Kept the walls, removed the roof, made it an outdoor courtyard, which is absolutely phenomenal. Really cool, amazing space. And we use it for outdoor entertainment. And that's actually operated under the name of Boiler 54, because the old boiler is still there. And if you know a boiler, I don't think I included any photos, unfortunately, but if you know a boiler, there's little portholes in the boiler. That boiler is still there, and that's our wine rack now. They accommodate a wine bottle perfectly, so if you have an old boiler, don't throw it away. This is one of our meeting rooms on the first floor. That's our other meeting room with another historic image put on one wall, blown up to kind of be room size. And that photo was taken in a manner that it works perfectly in room so that when you stand in the middle of the room, the reality, modern day ends and history continues into the photo. So it seems like that you're actually part of that history, part of that photo. Second floor is my law office, and this was the originally hotel rooms, and became the offices to the Newell Company when they moved in 1924. It's my law partner's office. He got the bay window. I didn't. By my own forbearance. It's a great it was put in the late 20s, tin ceiling in that room, which we spray painted gold. And then all the other enclosures you see in that room were produced with repurposed salvage materials that we kept in the site, B-board wall, B-board wainscoting, which is old-growth fir, which you can't find. This is the stairway, and it needed to be completely rebuilt, unfortunately, but third floor contains lofts. And what we did for the lofts is we furnished them, built them, furnished them, and we're leasing those as extended stay rentals to a local company. And that works out very well for us, works out well for me. I'm pretty particular in design and how things are laid out, and I probably couldn't live with myself if I had a tenant come in that picked furniture that didn't fit the space. Not that it's my business, but this allowed me to furnish them too, because I'm a control freak apparently. Or so I'm told. This is the other smaller unit. 2 lofts upstairs on the 3rd floor. Do y'all like that window, that little divider made of the windows? Cool, good, thank you. Thank you, thank you. My card's at the door in case, no, just kidding. And then on the 3rd floor, we have a hotel use, which is an even shorter term space for stays. It's called the Hart House Hotel, which is the historic original name of the hotel that was in the building. The building, again, built in 1876. It was owned by Eliza Kirkhart. I'm sure many of you have been to the Thousand Islands and are familiar with Bolt Castle. And that's on Hart Island, which was owned by Eliza Kirkhart, and that's where it originally got its name. And he was from Albion, and he had many business interests, including the Hart House Hotel. So we revived that name. This is the hallway. Any SHPO folks here today? No. Good. I'm sorry. I mean, they would be really upset if they saw an exposed stone wall, but there's a good reason for it. So, ditto on the exposed brick wall. Good reason for it. So this is one of our hotel units. And again, our ethic on the design for the hotel was to try to preserve the original historic building envelope and at the same time furnish and finish the spaces in the inside that brought them into modern day. And we also played around with some other eras, such as that 1960s or 70s Mad Men style chair, which is always fun. This is the other unit. We have more that we'd like to get online as well. And all original hardwood floors and the like. All historic original windows, we kept in place as well. About 85, 90 of those, which all were rebuilt. That takes care of my project. In addition to that project, I'm also involved with the Orleans Renaissance Group. And as I mentioned earlier, the Orleans Renaissance Group owns Bent's Opera House, which is situated across the street, which was a 2012 7 to Save property. That's it right there. First floor was retail space, second floor was office space, third floor contained the hall. And you see some historic photos there of what that looked like in its day. It's on the right-hand side of that photo. Built of Medina sandstone, which was named after our village, and is used in a lot of architecture across the state. The H.H. Richardson Psychiatric Center complex in Buffalo, the $1 million staircase here in this end of the state in Albany is built of Medina sandstone. It's certainly a point of pride for our community. This is the inside of the hall on the third floor. Of course, an old picture of it. And this is it today. Everything up there is intact. The stage, the corbelling underneath the stage, the box seats, the railings, the capitals, even the small, delicate wooden fretwork. You can barely make out over the box seat there. It's all there, all preserved, ready to be reborn. It's a 7 to Save project, and we're hoping to commence restoration of that project here in the coming year. I appreciate your attention today, and again, thank you to Hannah, and it's a real pleasure being here, and thank you very much for listening.
So, Jeff File, Saratoga, synonymous with redevelopment and the extraordinary success of Main Street in Saratoga. Worked in commercial real estate and development for more than 30 years. His expertise and experience encompasses office and retail property management, marketing and leasing, commercial development in all aspects of construction, including mechanical systems and cost analysis. And his projects have inspired a great deal of attention, additional follow-on investment in other related properties and nearby properties, and he and his wife have been catalysts for community redevelopment in the communities in which they work. They started in Saratoga, they're now in Troy. Many of you in the Canal Corridor might want to block 787 and make sure he diverts west down into the Mohawk Valley rather than comes to Albany, but we do appreciate all you've accomplished in the capital region and the vision you have ahead. So, Jeff File. Yes, sir. That's just, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Hannah, for inviting me to speak here today. It's an honor. I guess chronologically, I'll talk about Troy first because my wife, Dean, and I, who are File and Company, got started in Troy in 1989. And she's a native of Troy, grew up there. We got asked to be consultants to the Downtown Council of Troy to help them turn around the downtown because our background was retail leasing and development. And of course, everybody thinks that retail is the catalyst to bring back a downtown. It helps, but it's certainly not all there is to it. We spent about 18 months in Troy at that time, and the politics were so horrible that we one day looked at each other as we left City Hall and said, "We're out of here." And then a fellow named John Headley, who had redeveloped the Cluett Peabody Mill in Troy, a huge complex, into office space, called us about 15 years later and said, "Hey, you told me the day you left my office that you'd see me soon. That was 15 years ago. When are you coming back?" And we went and had lunch with John, and he roped us in again. We fell in love with Troy again and decided it was time to get involved again. And then the slide that you see there was our first project. It's called Powers Park Lofts, and I don't have a before shot of it, but it was about ready to be condemned before we bought it. And it was one of those things, we're driving through Lansingburg one day, this is North Troy, Lansingburg, driving through, and all of a sudden this building was there, and this is an area where it's all just two-story, single-story homes, no big buildings at all. This was the last building of the Powers oilcloth factory complex, which probably had 4 to 6 buildings originally. It was a big complex. That was all that was left, and I virtually stomped on the brakes. There was a for sale sign on it, and the next day we had it under contract for a pittance because it was in such bad condition. And we just fell in love with the building and made it into condominium lofts. And we engaged our son, who had just graduated from Colorado State with a degree in construction management. This was his first project. And after this project, he left and got out of construction management. But the after is the condominium apartments that look like that. And we sold them all well within a year, I think, and before the condo bust, so that we did okay. We didn't lose money on the project. And to this day, we go back and visit with people in the building, and they're glad to see us. So that's also a good sign. Going back to Saratoga Springs, we moved to Saratoga Springs in 1994. And at that time, if any of you have been to Saratoga Springs over the years, the way it looks today, it didn't look anything like that in 1994. There were major holes in the Broadway Main Street. There wasn't a new privately owned building built on Broadway in about 50 years when we got there, believe it or not. There was just old buildings in disrepair and empty lots. So we tried to find a building to rehab, but some of them were in such bad shape we were afraid of them. So we found an empty lot that we were able to buy, and we built that first new building in 50 years on Broadway, a 24,000 square foot retail and office building, which today has Eddie Bauer on the first floor. It has for 16 years, and started the redevelopment of Broadway, because once people saw that we could be successful with a new building, others came along to build new buildings. And I should add, there was no public money, there were no tax credit incentives, nothing for that building in Saratoga or for Powers Park Lofts. We did it all on our own, and we did it in Saratoga. We went to many banks because of our commercial development in the shopping center business. We knew all the bankers. We went to every banker we could think of and said, okay, we're going to build this building in Saratoga Springs on Broadway. And they said, what? On Broadway in Saratoga Springs? We couldn't get a loan. And then we went to Adirondack Trust, the local bank, and said, okay, we want to build this building. Here's our pro forma. What do you think? They said, let's do it. And they've been our partner on every project we've done since, because they get it. And they trust us, and they also own us. So we call them our partner. We don't call them our banker. They're our partner, and we have a very good partnership. So then we got back into Troy, and the former Stanley's department store, 42,000 square foot downtown building, beautiful Beaux Arts building, incidentally designed by Daniel Burnham, who Rick mentioned earlier. And one of the reasons we fell in love with this, it's just a great building. And that's the way it is today. And it was in pretty good shape. Exterior-wise, it was in pretty good shape. It was totally gutted inside. But I went through the building, and it was 1903 construction. And Troy has a lot of that vintage construction that's heavy timber and brick and wood floors. This was steel, iron, and concrete. Floors were level. It was a beautiful piece of... It was built a year after the Flatiron Building was built in New York City, which was also designed by Burnham. And same type of construction, a little bit smaller scale, but they called this a skyscraper when it was built because it had an elevator. It was one of the first buildings in Troy to have an elevator. And we decided to, and Troy was in pretty bad shape in 80s or 90. Dean, when did we do that? Was the first year? 2004. Well, it was bad. It was bad. This building, we tried to buy it in 1990 when we were leaving Troy, and we couldn't buy it. We couldn't afford to buy it. We ended up ultimately buying it, and a friend of mine who does a lot of apartments, thousands of apartments nationwide, called me up. He grew up in Troy. Called me up when it was in the Times-Union that we were going to turn this into luxury apartments, and he said, "Are you out of your mind? Luxury apartments in downtown Troy?" And we think there's a need for them because there are no luxury apartments in downtown Troy, so we're going to fill a niche. And we did, and they leased up relatively quickly, and we've had 95% occupancy ever since. So it's been a good success story. The hard part was the first floor retail, around 8,400 square feet of retail space, 16.5-foot ceilings, glorious space with the clerestory windows around the perimeter, 180 feet of storefront, just a magnificent space. But where do you find an 8,400 square foot tenant for downtown Troy? We were in the retail leasing business. We couldn't come up with anybody that wanted to do it. So then we did our own market study and decided that the highest and best use that would work in downtown Troy was a hardware store. And we went and talked to every hardware store in the region, and nobody was interested in doing it. They didn't know how to do an urban hardware store. There's no loading dock, there's no forklift, they just didn't get it. So we decided to open our own hardware store. And we went to all the hardware co-ops, Ace, True Value, and Do It Best, and ended up doing a Do It Best store, which is, will be 4 years in September. And it's been a tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of fun, and it's actually in black ink now, so we don't have to put any more money into it. It's doing very well. And it was the nucleus for a lot of new retail in downtown Troy, because it just instilled confidence that this could happen. And for the first year or two, people would come in and say, "You're never going to make it," or "You're still here?" Because businesses would open in downtown Troy and close in 6 months or a year. This was a pivotal corner, huge store for downtown Troy, and people said, "Wow, it can work." And it did work. And in the last 12 months, I think, it's about 15 new stores have opened in downtown Troy, stores or businesses like hairdressers and things like that. And they're opening and they're staying. They're doing well. So, and incidentally, across the street right here is Barker Park. Barker Park was, people used to call it Needle Park or Pigeon Park, because the drug addicts hung out there. It was terrible. We knew we had to make that better if we were going to lease luxury apartments. So we got together a group of people. There had been a group called Friends of Barker Park years before that had tried to get it going, but they hadn't gotten there. We reinitiated that group and raised $100,000, most of which my wife Dean did, and redid the whole park in cooperation with the city. The city supplied trucks and backhoes. We got all the materials. We had a landscape designer redesign the whole park, and today it's a lovely, lovely pocket park and an asset to the city. That's pretty much our story. The only other thing, because everybody here talks about financing and tax credits and all, this was a tax credit project, federal and state, before the better tax credit program. We didn't place the federal tax credits in time. We were rushing to get the building in service, and when we got it in service, we could no longer place the tax credits. So we've got federal tax credits that will still be with us when we die. And the state tax credits did help us a lot. The only public money we got was $100,000 through a Main Street grant to do the 180 feet of sidewalks here, because there are vaults under the sidewalks. The basement goes out under the sidewalk, and it was all collapsing. So we had to redo that, and we got $100,000 for that, and we got a $25,000 National Grid grant. That was all the public money that went into the project. I guess we're not good at getting public money, because we sort of charge ahead and not worry about things like that. We can't wait. I think it's an aversion to a bureaucracy that makes that happen. But it's been a very successful project, and very happy to have done it. And now we're still very involved in downtown Troy. I'm on the bid board there. We're there all the time. We don't live in Troy, but we might as well live in Troy, because we're there a large part of our lives. I think that's the story.
This is really a great hardware store, and I think one of the additions, I mean, it's great space. You've got hardwood floors in there. The shopping environment breathes differently than some of the. It's just a nice place to shop. For all the folks who are doing home renovation, restoration in Troy, the fact that you can locally source, you don't have to run out Route 7 for these types of materials. I don't know. For me, this project, and particularly your store operation here, sort of really puts a nice connection, synergy, it closes a loop in a very nice way. So, thank you, Jeff. Our final speaker is David Bucco. He was appointed Chief Operating Officer of the Gillespie Group in 1986 and has since served in that capacity, continues in that capacity, responsible for the day-to-day operations of all the company's operating divisions, including commercial real estate, industrial parks, distribution and logistics, and the exploration and production of natural resources. Mr. Bucco has participated throughout the country in the acquisition and development of over 10 million square feet of office and industrial real estate, in addition to over 20,000 apartment units. He also serves as president of Distribution Unlimited, Inc., one of the largest third-party logistics companies in the Northeast. And you cannot step out onto the sidewalk here outside of Proctor's, regardless of which direction you look in, you're seeing something that has been made better, made new by the Gillespie Group. And this, what has happened here, all of the testament to Schenectady's revitalization that you've heard today. The Gillespie Group has played a critical, pivotal role in that. So please welcome Mr. David Bucco.
This work okay? Can you hear me? I can't talk and press buttons at the same time, so Brooke is going to help me. I'm technologically challenged. First of all, I'm the only one standing between you and cocktails, apparently, which is not a good position to be in. So I'll try and keep it simple. We've had the opportunity, as opposed to these people, to be able to just point to things we've done when you go out here. Aside from what happened in Proctor's, I'm involved on Proctor's board, and we've done a lot here, over $35 million of renovations to here, but we've sort of adopted Schenectady. Our company got its start in 1969. We've developed all over the country, developed industrial parks. We've got over 12 million square feet of space now, multifamily throughout the country, and in our spare time we're doing about 10,000 barrels of oil and gas out in California, Texas, and Louisiana. But over the last 5 or 6 years we've adopted Schenectady, or Schenectady may have adopted us. We've invested over $150 million in this community. We've used, contrary to what you have, Jeff, we've used brownfield, new markets, urban renewal credits, restore, National Grid, Main Street, NYSERDA, PIFs, TIFs, historic credits, and there's a handful of others. And we haven't used the movie film tax credit yet, but we're going to. We're doing that one too, although those are an adventure. Those low-income housing credits. But you know, developing in cities, you've got to level the playing field, because developing in cities versus suburbs, it's difficult. It's more expensive. You're dealing with the curse of our history and the blessing of our history. Some buildings you can't rehab the right way. Some have to be taken down. You don't have suburban parking. You've got to do parking garages. You've got to make sure people can have the ability of having the same cost in the suburbs as they do in the city. So that's how we try and attack it, and how to make it a level playing field. You can't charge, people aren't going to pay more rent in downtowns. New York City, yes. San Francisco, yes. Some of the bigger cities, Albany, Schenectady, Troy, they're not going to pay more. So you're competing on a price level. So that's why we've got to use these things. And I've got a talented team of accountants, lawyers, and real estate people that wade through the reams of paperwork necessary to deal with this stuff. What I'm going to do is similar. This is Schenectady back in 2000. It was a ghost town. I mean, we used to be one of the more powerful cities in the country back when General Electric in its heyday, almost 40,000 people, American Locomotive, another 20,000. I mean, this was rocking and rolling. And GE went down to 3,000, and downtown was a ghost town. So we attacked it building by building. This is, if you walk across the street, we own the entire block, and we did it building by building. The downtown used to be made up of dollar stores, rental centers. It was pretty depressed. As you can flip through, I mean, then there was a building on the corner here, if you go to the left, that was just falling down, Foster Building, I believe it was. So we ended up having to take that one down. It was just too far gone. So we built a hole and figured out we got a 6-screen movie theater and put offices above it. So we were able to attract Siemens. And that's what it looks like right now. We got a company called Bowtie. They did 6 screens. We got a little creative in terms of financing. but it's bringing in about 200,000 people into downtown right now. Fantastic operations, and then we've tried to figure out, what do you do? Stay with that for a second. Upstairs, we got Siemens to move their training center here. So they have about 50,000 square feet, and we're able to get them to convince, they wanted to move out of downtown. They were on Erie Boulevard, they wanted to move to Albany. Myself and one of the economic development team took their team and walked through and said, this is what we're going to do. They locate here, they keep the hotel, the Hampton down the street here full almost all the time. They train people from all over the world. So you got restaurants, they're going to the movie theater, they're staying in hotels. And they don't, one of their biggest concerns was when you bring people in from all over the country, they go out at night and drink. So guess what? They're able to stay in the hotel, they don't have to rent cars, and liability-wise, it makes life a little easier. This was what across the street looked like 10 years ago. Pretty depressing. That's what it looks like now. The first floor is office space. The top floor was an old theater, the Orpheum Theater, and we converted that into loft apartments. Did 7 beautiful units, leased them up in a matter of months. So it's all full right now. That was an old D&K department store. Again, this was one of the highlights of our downtown. We were able to bring in Paul Mitchell schools. Actually, that was one. We had John Paul DiGiorio come in, who owns Paul Mitchell, who's worth about $4 billion. One of his associates came in, who was from Schenectady, came in here for his father's funeral and said, wow, I like what's going on. So they opened up the first, there's only one other Paul Mitchell training school in New York, and that's in Long Island. This thing is spectacular. If you have a chance, go take a walk through it. They train, they're doing about 180 students a year. They're fully accredited, and they do a lot of things in the community. Like, for instance, one day a year is Give a Hug Day, so all the students come out in the streets and give everybody hugs, which is kind of weird, but it works. Again, this was a failed urban renewal project. Back my first start here, I was a CPA in Schenectady in 1975, and in 1981 they got urban renewal money, so they converted middle of downtown into small offices and a hockey rink. And it was terrible. They ended up, then everybody moved out of there. The hockey rink was falling apart. They converted it to a soccer field. They moved their social services operation in. The building was decored with orange carpeting on the walls. We had a fountain in front here that our homeless used to take baths in. Bubble baths. I mean, literally, it was bizarre. But now you walk through it. So we tore down. These were 3 buildings. One was a Wallace department store from 1892 we kept. The other was W.T. Grant that we kept, connected the buildings, and then we tore down because we couldn't retrofit. This was the 1980s architecture. It was ugly, so we just tore it down and connected. So if you go through, I mean, it was just a tough project. It's about a $32 million project, 237,000 square feet. Now look at it. I mean, this was, we had an architect that was just phenomenal in terms of what he was able to do. So if you look in that building, you're going to have cocktails and the restaurant right across the street. That's the inside of the restaurant. They're turning people away. I mean, right across from Proctor's, we run around 700,000 people through this facility every year, so it's the best, grade A location. AAA had our MVP expanded from down the street. They had another 50,000 square feet of office space there. Community college, this was kind of creative. The community college was on the outskirts of town. We convinced them to build classrooms in this building. And if anybody wants to go through it afterwards, it's phenomenal. We did 10 classrooms, then they expanded for another 4. They're running about 2,200 students through downtown right now. On a community college, it was an island, and they tied in with a bus, and these kids are terrific. They're so respectful of property, and it's really created a little bit of a nightlife in town. AAA, they took a whole floor for their headquarters, great office space. The people like being downtown now. They're able to go to the YMCA, which we have a YMCA in this building. So that building across the street has classrooms, office space, restaurant, bank, CVS, a YMCA. The YMCA's membership increased from 2,000 to 5,000 people. It's as nice as any Class A gym around. You can see full size. We converted the hockey rink to basketball court. And it's great, creating a lot of leagues for companies at night, et cetera. It's really turned out to be a kind of a fun project. NBT Bank, The president and chairman of NBT Bank, son went to Union College. He was sitting across the street and having dinner one night with me, and he said we should have a bank here. So that's how the lease got signed. This was on the corner, if you go out to the right, this was one of the first projects we did. This was just, right, that parking lot there was vacant. It used to be another old theater back in the history of Schenectady, and we convinced a company that was scattered throughout the region, MVP Health Plans, which is a $3.5 billion health insurance company. And that was an interesting project because everybody in the suburb wanted them. I mean, there were 1,200 employees. Although a funny story is the previous economic development regime in the city didn't want us to build that building any bigger. I had a tenant for 2 other floors, and they wouldn't let me build it because it said it would be too big for our community. We lost a 50,000 square foot tenant because of it. That regime is no longer in place. But it shows you when you get into and as Jeff said, some of the politics. I know Troy's had them, some of the communities had them. We had them here. The county was one that wouldn't talk to the city. Everybody was fighting. There was jealousies. And now they're all under one regime, whether it's Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. Everybody's working together. But what we had to do on that one is we had to build we built a 1,000-car parking garage to level the playing field. They had to get parking there. So we added that on, and MVP's there now. They expanded another 50,000, which they could have expanded in that building, but they moved into one of our others. So now they have 1,200 people downtown. This is what downtown looks like at night. And if you'll see it tonight, it shows you what you can really do with everybody working together. And again, these are some of our projects. There's a variety of other developers now that have been motivated. The next block, which Sefcu Square, Sefcu did their insurance department. They moved here. This is another interesting site. This was a former Big N department store that was closed on a brownfield site on the old American Locomotive. It's on the northern end of town. American Locomotive used to be one of the largest manufacturers of locomotives in the world. The U.S. government during World War II actually put them out of business because they converted from locomotives to tanks. And General Motors and General Electric set up locomotive facilities in Pennsylvania and Canada, and all of a sudden when the war was over, there was no more locomotive business. So we had this was, and the Erie Canal went right through it, as a matter of fact. So we took that over, tore it down. This is a brownfield project, one of the largest brownfield projects in upstate New York, and we built a $45 million LEED certified gold office building for the Golub Corporation, Price Chopper Supermarkets. And again, they're very community-minded, and they decided to keep their headquarters in downtown. So that's another 1,000 jobs we kept. This is a building, an old mica manufacturing facility just up the street on Broadway, vacant forever. We converted that, and we consolidated all the social service functions for the county into one location. In the past, people had to go for food stamps one place, unemployment the other, child services at someplace else. So we consolidated it all. We did something similar in Charleston, West Virginia, and really it's one-stop shopping. And what it does do, these people don't have to get in cabs, they don't have to take buses, they're able to deal with it. Plus it consolidates it all in one place versus having all your social people waiting outside on the streets on your main street. So it's a very convenient location, yet it provides terrific services. That's the second part of the building that we're doing right now. That's the low-income housing credit deal, which is an adventure. And that's what it'll be, housing for 150 SRO for the people that live in the Y right now, which is near the community college. Right now they're living in about 80 square feet of space, unair-conditioned space, that it just, with community showers, etc. Here they're going to have 400 square feet. It really steps it up in terms of what we have to give back to these people and get them back on their feet. While I'm doing, and you'll see how beautiful that is. You know, an interesting program, and we'll go through one or two more projects we have down here with the homeless is called the Ambassadors Program. City Mission has a facility here. There's a lot of homeless people that live here. So instead of dealing with the issues and having them take baths in your fountains, etc., what we do is Proctor's, in conjunction with the business community, set up this ambassador program where we outfit them with uniforms, walkie-talkies, flashlights, and pay them an hourly wage. And at night, when there's events going on or downtown is busy, They help people to their cars, they give people directions, they give you a sense of security, they do the crosswalks. And let me tell you, it's a great program. I'd encourage something like that in any of your communities. Gives these people a sense of dignity, but it also gives your customers here in downtown a sense of safety too. I actually did it and volunteered walking with these guys and women, and it's a fantastic, these people are so proud to start getting on their feet and get a little spending money going on. So it's a great program, and we keep expanding it to other parts of the city as well, I hope. And then we've got the next project we're tackling. This is the old American locomotive. Down, you'll see the road going through it. That used to be the Erie Canal. That's now Erie Boulevard. Price Chopper is just to the right over there where we did the office building. Those were all manufacturing facilities. So we took 60 acres on the river. It's almost a mile of riverfront. Tore down, take a look at those buildings, how bad they were. I mean, it was just a ghost town there. So, I mean, we looked and tried to have adaptive reuse, but sometimes, you know, there's nothing worth saving on some of these buildings. Roofs were falling down, craneways were falling down. So it was better off just taking it down, salvaging the steel, and creating a clean plate. So this is what we're going to be doing. This is our next adventure. It's about a $180 to $200 million project. We're working with the Canal Corp and working with the architects to design a harbor. And there's some challenges on that because of the rising and falling of the canal. But we're going to be doing about 40 boat slips. That's a rendering of the apartments. We're doing a supermarket. We're doing retail. We're doing a Marriott. And then a combination of apartments and condos. We've done all the demo right now. We've had to bring in 300,000 yards of fill to raise it above the floodplain. With Hurricane Irene, we got to learn what the floodplain actually was, right or wrong, but we got to do about 3 feet. This will be, I think, a great example of what you can do along the Mohawk River Erie Canal. Demand is there. We're very confident. We've got GE on one side. We've got Golub. GE has 4,000 employees. GR&D has another 3,000 employees. You've got Ellis Hospital that has another 3,000 employees. You've got Golub with 1,000 employees. You've got MVP. So there's a built-up demand. We're creating a lifestyle center, and then we want to do a walkway over Erie Boulevard to make it connective to downtown, because what we don't want to do is detract from what we're doing here, but complement it. So it's fun. We're recreating a city here. So that's the Gillespie Group.
Thank you, sir. Most impressive. I hope one of the things that this panel has accomplished is that for those of you living and working in the Canal Corridor, that we don't have to look to the Hudson River region. We don't have to look out of state. We can really look 15 miles west or 15 miles east on the canal and find a success story, something that we can replicate, something that we can be challenged by. I think the more we can point to local successes, the more we can build on local points of reference, the more certain I think local government will be in undertaking a similar challenge. Local investors will see the same opportunity. So the importance of local success stories, whether it be in Fort Plain, the importance of local initiatives such as is being undertaken in Amsterdam and other communities. We need those local stories. So please understand that what you accomplish in your community is going to be just as important for the next municipality upstream or down. So, Hannah, do we have time for any Q&A? There is. One here. Did you have one?
Thank you. I have a question for Rick about the Main Street LLCs. I was a little bit confused. When you create this, do you create this for each project, like a separate LLC probably? And then do you also operate, say if you have like tenants downstairs and upstairs, do you also manage that, or how does that work?
Microphone materializes. Thank you. One of the beauties of the Main Street LLC concept that I've observed is that we created one LLC at the beginning. We did our first project, which was a 12,000 square foot building. And fast forward to the successful completion of that, and very interestingly, all the investors were very excited and interested in doing another project. So it becomes an interesting question. Do you, at that point, create a new LLC? Or do you use the same entity? And a corollary to that is, do you, now that you have a successful entity that's not only cash flowing, but in that case was actually turning a profit, do you close the door and say, well, should have gotten here earlier, and only take additional investment from the existing members and borrow the rest? Or do you open the doors and say, hey everybody, look, the risk is less, we have a successful cash flowing, profit generating project already done, and we're going to still let you come in and join us. And that's what we chose to do, unanimously. So we increased the number of members 50% the second time around. And of course, you bring in more capital from investors, you borrow less, and so that helps with your return on investment. So in our case, that was the path that we chose. It made sense from a management standpoint. We manage it. So basically, during the project, the management was construction management was one of those in-kind investments that was done. At the completion of the projects, it just turned into kind of a cash, kind of an outsourcing. So there was no more in-kind. Just the day-to-day management is just outsourced to a member investor on a day-to-day basis.
Other questions from the audience? In back. Rick?
This might be a little complex question for the Gillespie Group, but the change in attitude from the municipalities from being adversarial between the city and the county to working together, were there some things that the community or individual or leadership did in the community to, or in the development community that made that come about?
Well, one, the development community ignored Schenectady for a while because of the civil war that was going on politically. That's one way to speak about it. But number two is they did something kind of unique, and very few communities have it. I don't know if you've heard of legislation they enacted called the Schenectady Metroplex Development Authority, which is an economic development engine and is one that is funded by a portion of sales tax. So they consolidated all the economic development functions under one roof. So it's one-stop shopping. We work hand in glove with them, as well as with the the Downtown Improvement District, as well as the Chamber. Everybody, if you got a tenant or want to encourage somebody to come here, now it's really simple. You don't have to go to 10 different places. And as a developer, we've got enough complications, whether it's using new markets tax credits or brownfield and all that stuff. You don't need a complicated approval process. We go to the city approval or the county approval, they're right there with us. Everybody's rowing the oars in the same direction. The other is you've got to make sure that your development plans are consistent with what the community wants. I mean, when we look at it, and we've done a lot throughout the country, but if the community doesn't want it, we don't go there. Because it's one of those where, I mean, developing financing is not easy, so you got to make sure you're consistent. The last thing we want to do is go to a planning board and not know the answer before we walk in. But having the one step, you go to some communities, you don't even know who's in charge of economic development. Or you got too many people in charge of economic development. So having some type of one-stop shopping and a consistent, having the county, the city, all in sync. I mean, we're blessed with a very good mayor here. The department heads, we got, it works. You got to have professionals running it.
Yes, ma'am.
David, another question. That was insightful, too, your answer. Thank you. This might be an unpopular question because of the recent comptroller's report, but a lot of people talked about historic tax credits, federal, state side. new market tax credits you just mentioned, did you or did anybody on the panel, have you ever taken advantage of the brownfield tax credit program, which I know is due to sunset and then in 2015, but a lot of the lands along the canal and along our waterways in New York, of course, are like the locomotive site, which are brownfields, and I wondered if you'd taken advantage of that program and used that.
Absolutely. That Gola building was brownfield.
Okay.
And the Elko project is brownfield, actually. We put both of them in. And, in all honesty, the program, a lot of people took advantage of it. I know a handful of them in New York City that you did a minor amount of cleanup and ended up getting gazillions of dollars of tax credits. And unfortunately, they gave the whole program a black eye. But it's one of those where you hope that whatever programs the state does, they don't let this one go. They just should make sure it's done the right way. Because without that brownfield program, we wouldn't have done Golub's headquarters because the site was contaminated. Previous owners had no pockets to clean it up. DEC was terrific. DOH is terrific. It's one of the best programs we've been involved with. And it's really going to help us do that mixed-use development on the river. And that's going to be the same where if you go down the canal to Utica, to Rome, to Syracuse, et cetera, there's a lot of contaminated sites. We used to put factories on the river. That's what happens. So it's upstate, and it's a program that I don't think is necessary down in New York City, but it gave the program a black eye with those people that took advantage of it.
So I have a question for David and Jeff. If there were any sentimental factors, because you guys are big developers working in, let's say, an unconventional upstate downtown context. So was there any sentimental attachments, to Troy because of your wife or because your office and you live here? I mean, did that tip the balance? Because it's hard to get big developers, good quality big developers to do projects downtown. So did that have anything to do with it, that this was your town? And
Sentiment doesn't have anything to do with it.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
But it requires creativity and a lot. I mean, it's also easy. I mean, I couldn't do this project if I was in Albuquerque or something, because it's a contact sport. So it benefits you knowing the local people. I mean, so therefore, sure, it's a little bit easier. And you get a lot more, and if you're doing economic development, really it's a good way to increase the tax base versus just giving contributions and all that type of stuff. So from our standpoint, we keep doing it because it complements what we do. It makes the stuff, there's a couple of projects that I showed you that are break even at best, but they were done for a purpose to complement some of the others that make money. So it's a big jigsaw puzzle, but we don't do it for sentimental reasons, but it's nice to do it in your own backyard. You live here, as one of the speakers said, if you live here and your people are buying homes and you're helping the tax base. Our next attack in Schenectady right now is to deal with the housing issue. Okay, we've dealt with retail, we've dealt with entertainment, we've dealt with offices, but now we've got to deal with housing in some of the poorer communities, our neighborhoods around here that we've got to focus on, whether it's demolishing them or rehabbing them and setting up a program like that, because it's got to be balanced.
Jeff or Andrew, do you have a response to that?
Well, sentimentality does come into play to some degree in our case, but not because my wife was from Troy, but because we get sentimental about old buildings. And we just fall in love with old buildings. Some of them walk into it and say, oh my God, we got to get out of here. We're going to fall in love with this building and want to fix it. So there is some emotion involved, but they all have to make money or serve another purpose to another project that's close by. It has to be sympathetic to the total goal, otherwise you don't want to do it.
Final question.
This goes to Andrew. I'm Jeff Gritz-Savage from New York State Canal Corporation. Andrew? Oh, there you are. On the hotel that you've developed in Medina, you have extended stay, but do you have nightly stay also? You said you had short-term.
Yeah, that's what the hotel is, yes.
Oh, okay, okay, because...
And not hourly, no, definitely no hourly.
No, no. No, but
we're going to see where the market is.
Right. What we've noticed at boat shows and from inquiries that we get on the telephone is that a lot of people wanting to know what lodging is available along the canal, because there's a proliferation of day boats, like trailerable boats that you could bring up and launch at the 40 boat launches along the canal. And so, we've listed a lodging page. The fact that David is going to develop a Marriott right here, I hope there's a courtesy dock so that the people can stop there and spend the night. But that seems to be something that our customers are looking for, and that the boats are getting smaller. That may be because the bigger boats are more expensive or they burn more gas, but we have plenty of boats, but a lot of them are day boats, and they need places to stay. So as you're developing stuff, this is...
That's great to know, and that's one of the reasons why we did it, because, there are no real lodging outlets close to the canal in a lot of these communities. I can't really think of too many out at our end of the canal, because they locate out in the Strip, which is usually mile plus away from the canal. And we're right on the canal, right on the bicycle Route 5, so I think there's a real niche there, and I'd like to...
Well, we've got a listing on our website, and you'll be listed on that. And if you know of any others that I've missed, let me know.
Take a look at it, because we do have other B&Bs. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
One final question right behind you, sir.
Actually, related to that question, for the Gillespie Group, with your waterfront planning, I'm wondering if you are planning to do any sort of public access dock where I find that we find that lacking in a lot of places for miles and miles and miles. So we're really hoping to see public access dockage for people to be able to come in.
We're doing two things, actually. We're connecting to the bike path,
Great.
Which is good. Right now, the bike path takes a detour through Schenectady, through downtown, versus going along the river. But number two is we're going to have, it's a big number, but we're designing a harbor so that we're able to take people. I want people to come into from the boats. I mean, it's not going to be, we're not going to have a lot of overnight accommodations. I don't want to have that. But we are going to be able to have public access, to have people use the restaurants, the stores, as well as people that live there are going to be able to dock their boats there.
Right.
So we're probably going to have 40 to 40, and then we're going to have on the water, we're going to have space for larger boats, because doing the harbor, if you designed it for some of the big boats, it's just going to get too congested.
Right.
So we'll have along the canal to be able to have some of the larger boats, and then we'll have probably something like 40 foot and under going into the harbor.
So then you'll have actual slip dedicated to people who aren't staying, but they need to stop and go get groceries and get back to their...
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely, and it's important to have the grocery. Right now, our downtown, that area is basically a federally designated food desert, so we do need more shopping down here. So therefore, having a retail grocery store downtown is important. We actually did one in downtown Saratoga as well, and it turned out to be very good as part of the mixed-use project.
So in conclusion, I'll note that this is the first panel that hasn't made a millennial reference or a generation X, Y, or Z reference. So this is now panel Get It Done. So I think you've seen 4 very interesting slices of experience and success and vision for where canal communities can renew themselves, how they can renew themselves, the tools and the vision that's needed. So please give this panel a warm round of applause. And so, Hannah, if you would come up and close things out.
I kind of feel like Oprah walking here.
Well, you should, because you are a star. We thank you for pulling this all together, and I'm going to turn this over to Beth as well.
I'm gonna interrupt you here for just a minute, Hannah, because Hannah is, she's gonna run away because she knows that I'm gonna try to acknowledge her. But this has been just a great success, and we're so happy that you're all here. And the one person who will not take any credit for it, but really deserves all the credit for pulling this together is Hannah, and we just want to thank you so much.
Now I'm going to forget all my words here, but I just wanted to thank, if I could get, I just wanted to thank our sponsors again. And let me bring up this. Are they all in the audience? Mike? Mike has had to leave. So maybe we don't have to acknowledge them, but let's acknowledge them anyway. They were so instrumental. All of our sponsors here, and a lot of the things you see behind the scenes, they had a big role in. But it's not only the sponsors with the financial information. Sorry, I speak and talk, speak and do this. You don't see that? So Mike is not here from the Community Preservation Corporation, but he was here for a short while. He's in lobby, maybe if I yell, but if you have a chance to see Mike, he might be staying for the drinks, which I'm holding you up for, like David. But please have a chance to say thank you to him. Bergman Associates, I'm not sure if anyone from Bergman, Steve, is still around. Thank you to Bergman. Thank you, Steve. We appreciate their efforts. Thank you. Made a huge difference in your financial support. Also, as Beth mentioned at the beginning, we had a lot of marketing support and just general support year-round from Senator Gillibrand's office and Paul Tonko's office. I don't know if their representatives are still around, but have a chance to thank them if you see them later. Our event sponsors, NICOM, I don't know if Wade's still here. We're losing people. Thank you, Wade. One of the things that happens in the quarter is a lot of different organizations and capacity that does a little bit of the same things. And so I think the more that we can work with organizations like NICOM, with the Preservation League, the better, to bring our constituents together to talk about these things and to really have a multidisciplinary approach. So we very much thank you for getting the word out, for being facilitators, for talking through a lot of these conversations with us. Our local host, Downtown Schenectady Improvement Corporation, thank you. They're going to be next door, I hope, probably not serving drinks at the bar, but maybe telling us a little bit about downtown. I'm not sure if the offer, David, is open to just wander into the Y and walk around, or some of these buildings.
Sure.
But if you're going to be at the next door at Johnny's, you may be interested in, taking people through whatever.
I'll be on the patio at Johnny's if anybody wants to take a walk through, whether it's the Y or the community college classrooms, which is all part of one complex. More than happy to take people, or Brooke will as well.
That's great. That's an ad hoc tour that kind of, it's an added bonus that you didn't know about, so that's great. Proctor's, I have to give a big thank you to Proctor's, their staff. Mike, are you still up in the booth? Wave to Mike. The technology expertise in this facility is just fantastic. So everybody at Proctor's has been great. We've had Proctor's staff always asking me what we need and what I need. So thank you, Mike, and everybody on the staff. Canal Corporation is a constant. Sharon, John, still here. Jeff, Grit Savage. Thank you for all you do in partnership throughout the year. Couldn't have done it without you. The Mazzone Hospitality, if you all liked your food today, they were great and have been with me throughout the process to making sure it went smoothly. So all these play a role, and when you think about your own communities and inviting, we had probably nearly 100 people here today that are hopefully going to spend money in Schenectady while you're here. And so having a venue like this and partners like this that can help really make a difference. If you hadn't had I don't want to call out one particular business, but if you head out through the arcade and across the Broadway, there's an excellent bakery that's affiliated with the Mazzoli Group, who owns Johnny's and
Malozzi's.
Malozzi's, thank you.
Plus,
there's Mazzone and Malozzi's. My niece makes requests, my Connecticut niece makes requests to me for the chocolate mousse every time I go, so I have to take a trip to Schenectady to get the chocolate mousse to bring to her, my 9-year-old niece. Thank you to the speakers, moderators, the rest of the staff that's been running around.